My name is Tyree Marshall, and I'm an artistic associate at Skylight Theater Company. Welcome to Skylight Live. We're so happy to have you. Tonight is our final panel of our series, We're Not Free Until We're All Free, in celebration of Juneteenth. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's panel is called Storytelling is Medicine. And before I get into why it's so important, I wanted to acknowledge that I live in Los Angeles, California, and I live on the stolen territory of the Chumash and Tongva peoples, and we must acknowledge and honor them. Storytelling is Medicine is a panel about pathways to healing transgenerational trauma for Indigenous peoples through storytelling, through art, through film, through listening. And I'm so happy that we're finally able to have this conversation at Skylight because I've been wanting to have it since I started working here. And I want to thank a very special person who none of this would have been possible without, and her name is Crystle Lightning. Crystle, thank you. Crystle was able to bring such beautiful people together to have what I know will be such an amazing conversation. And I'm so excited to introduce our moderator for the evening because she's not very far from home for Crystle, and her name is Georgina Lightning. Yes, it is her mother, who is incredible. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree when it comes to that family. So I'm honored to introduce Georgina Lightning.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this panel. I'm so excited, and I'm grateful to Gary Grossman, the artistic director of Skylight Theater, for conceiving this idea and following through with producer Tyree Marshall. Thank you, Tyree, and everybody else who's helping to facilitate this. Seth, thank you for putting this all together for us, technology, so that we could all speak and hang out together. First of all, I'll introduce myself. Georgina Lightning at Sigason. I'm in the land where the beaver lives in Saskatchewan River, and it's traditional. I'm actually living on traditional territory of the Papas Chase people. And White Bear Woman is my traditional name. I'm from the Bear Clan. And the Nehiyaquat Confederacy is the Confederate that I belong to. So I'm going to pass it off instead of doing the introductions. Everybody introduces themselves based on their treaty territory and traditional names, etc. So I want Kairyn, Kalani, and Michael to introduce themselves. We'll start with Michael, then Kalani, and then Kairyn. Okay?
Great.
Go ahead.
My name is Michael Uribes. I am Gabrielino, Shoshone, and Yaqui. I'm actually on the land right now that my family comes from. My great-great-grandmother is interred at the San Gabriel Mission. I'm also Yaqui from actually not too far the same area, so I'm kind of centrally localized in and of myself.
Right. Kalani?
Aloha, my name is Kalani Queypo, and I was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I'm excited because I'm seeing Crystle Lightning's name pop up here, so this is so awesome. I'm currently in North Hollywood, where the Gabrielino Tongva people were the original stewards of this land. So thank you, Michael, to all of your ancestors who took great care of this land. And I'm so excited to be here with Georgina and the rest of the group and to have a lively conversation.
Kairyn?
Aboashtet, Kairyn Potts Magepchat, Alexis Nakota, Sioux Nation Tedecha Chemochat. Hello, everybody. My name is Kairyn Potts. I am originally from the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation. I'm Woodstony. I'm also from the Paul First Nation in Treaty 6 territory. I grew up in the Skutchewa-Skayikando. Currently, though, I'm making my home in the beautiful Dish with One Spoon Treaty territory in what's colonially known as Toronto, in the homelands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat people. So, hi, thanks so much for having me.
And just joining us now is the beautiful Crystle Lightning. So Crystle, we've just done our introductions based on our treaty territory, etc. So if you want to introduce yourself in the way that you do.
And say everybody, my name is Crystle Lightning. I was born in Treaty 6, Enoch Cree Nation. Grew up in Los Angeles, California. And just 3 years ago, when my son Kisik was born, we moved back home to be with family and to get back enriched into our cultural, our family and cultural beliefs and everything else to raise our son in that way. So I'm currently right now in Montreal, Quebec, filming a TV show called Ghosts. And so I'm really happy that I was able to join you guys. I'm really excited about this panel.
Just to put two and two together, it was Crystle's acting coach from way back when in Beverly Hills Playhouse, Gary Grossman, that actually conceived this idea. And it was Crystle that actually facilitated the unity, us getting together and give the suggestion, name suggestion. So yeah, she helped to facilitate the collective. So thank you, Crystle. So here we are. I've sent everybody some questions prior, and I'm going to start at the top with introducing the context of film industry. In the context of film industry, how can our industry help with healing trauma from history of colonization is the first question. So it's a loaded question, but it's very much present. We're talking, this is the day and age of reconciliation. The Pope just gave an apology. He's coming to Canada. He's going to be in Lac Saint Anne, Ermineskin, and the church right downtown Edmonton here. So, he's going to be visiting our region here and talking with our people. And we're hoping he's going to rescind the doctrine of discovery, which is the root of all evil for us, 500 years of hell on earth here for us. So we're hoping he rescinds that. And there's going to be a whole shift. So these dialogues can help plant seeds in people of power, people who are green. So within that context, Kalani, would you start? We don't hear you, hon.
Yeah, this is my first new member, people. Thanks for ushering me into the technology of the 2000s. Okay, so yes, I was agreeing that this is a loaded question, right? And the question is like, how can story help the healing of trauma from the history of colonization? So we're talking about a long history of first depiction, right? And I think we all talk about this, that the power of television, of film, to reach so many people comes with this huge responsibility. And I think that in the very early times of Hollywood, it was about sensational stories with no regard to humanity, honestly. And it was entertainment, entertainment, entertainment. And it becomes the people who get to tell the story. It becomes their chance to tell the story in which they want, right? And so we have this long history of a specific way of telling stories that were rooted in fantasy and entertainment. So I think now we find ourselves in a place where we're not just trying to correct or educate people on history, but then we're also trying to find a way to use our artistry in order to create cathartic experiences, right? So that it's not just rooted in entertainment, it's rooted in storytelling, which is different for Indigenous people. The act of storytelling and creating story and engaging in story is a community effort, and it's a commentary on what's happening. It's a way to teach lessons. It's a way to remember things that are important to us. So I think that we have this opportunity, but it's also this huge responsibility where we have to come in and we don't get to start with a blank slate and say, let's start with like what's fun and let's celebrate the things that we really enjoy about storytelling, where in fact we have to come at it saying, okay, I know this is what you've experienced before. Let me explain to you what was happening there. And let me explain to you what's happening now. So I agree. I think it's a loaded question. So here we are. We rely on our artists to look at, examine, and find the humanity in these stories that we're trying to tell now. So it's deep, but it's also a very exciting time, right? Because we get to see different perspectives, and it's a slow moving current, but it's a current that's moving things around, and it's allowing people to see things shift in the waters of storytelling. I don't even know if any of that made sense, but that's what I have to offer.
Thank you, Kalani. Do you want to take a shot at that, Kairyn?
Sure, absolutely. I really echo a lot of what Kalani was saying in terms of story being just so pivotal and so important to who we are as Indigenous people, and specifically in the sense that all we are is story. And I was taught that story is almost like currency, and the stories that we tell people about ourselves is really who we are. And we're all just kind of a collection of events that have happened in our lives that really make up who we are. And for a long time, our stories have been so rich and deeply rooted in oral tradition and so beautiful. And so we've had this kind of this structure of colonization that has happened. And I always say that colonization is a structure. It's not one single event that just happened in the past and we moved on from it. It's really got its tendrils rooted quite deep into our communities. And so now this story that we're telling about ourselves and about our communities and how beautiful we are is being shifted. It's being taken over a little bit by colonization. And now this story that we're telling about ourselves is one of being survivors, one of being people who are just trying to get through things, damaged people. And so we're now telling ourselves the story all the time. You see it in the news, you see it in every single form of media. Anytime there's something coming out about Indigenous people, it's always about this idea of recovering, reconciliation, genocide, colonization, decolonization, all of these different words to describe Indigenous people. And they don't belong to us. These are not stories that we have been telling about ourselves since time immemorial. These are stories that are now being forced upon us. And so this idea of healing through the power of story really comes down, I think, to the fact that we need to allow Indigenous people to reclaim that narrative and take hold of those reins again and allow ourselves to tell our stories in the way that we know how, in the way that is so unique and specific to so many of our Indigenous nations. Stories of happiness, stories of triumph, stories of love. And the more that we get to do that, I really think those stories are going to replace the ones that we're constantly telling about ourselves and about our people, and especially our young people. Those are going to be the ones that are going to get to grow up and see these stories being told and hear them and watch them and experience those. And then next thing you know, we're going to be having our young generations telling these beautiful stories and actually becoming the people in those stories. We really have to lay that out in front of them and allow them to be able to have the opportunity to understand this is who we are. It's for Indigenous, by Indigenous. And that's really, I think, how we're gonna utilize this superpower that Indigenous people have of storytelling, of being just amazing, freaking deadly storytellers, and allowing us to really allow that to be our healing and that to be our washte chinapta, our good medicine, our maskikia, and really remind ourselves that has always been our power. And that's something that we're really, really good at and is so intrinsic to who we are. So that's what I think about it. Awesome.
And that's true. We've been, storytelling is in our DNA. I mean, you can see the petroglyphs. Those are stories. Stories have been used to govern our nations, to set laws, to teach us things, to pass on traditions, to teach us about ceremony and rites of passage. Stories have been the like the staple of our communities. And once we were silenced and the language taken away, it changed everything. Even just theory of storytelling in the English way is completely different than storytelling in our Indigenous ways. We have feminine and masculine, we have animate and inanimate words. It's such a different way of speaking and conveying information. Something that, you know, that we see as something so grand and beautiful could be minimized to one single word that doesn't have the color and the meaning or the sense of what that item is, because it's a dead language, English. And we use the English language globally around the world to tell stories. So one of the things that I love is going on film festivals in Egypt or Africa or anywhere else. The stories are so profound. And so to me, I think part of the healing is as Indigenous people or people of color, that are still intact with their ceremonies and culture and traditions, the stories they tell are completely different than anyone who's not, than like somebody who's completely removed from that. But anyone who has a connection is going to tell a story differently. The story Older Than America is a 4-act story structure. It doesn't follow movie structure. And I did that because it's like, we have to move on. And so many people went, huh? Like, you know how puppies, when they hear something weird, it's like, huh? You know, they go, how come you added that at the end? Like, well, how could Auntie Apple hug her at the end? It's like, because that's what it's about. We have to heal at the end. And it's about returning back to love. If we're turning back to ourselves, and she's always had that, that's what was taken away from her. So there's the polar opposite of Auntie Apple and Irene, right? So, and that's what we have. We have stories that are 7 story structure. We have genders. Our genders don't even say he and her. You know, there's expression. We call them expressions, and they're not gender based. It's not about sexuality. It's about roles in the community. You know, it has nothing to do with your sex. So it's just a world different. So, you know, when this was brought up, Gary brought this up, it's like, okay, well, wow, this is going to be a major education, because first of all, in introducing all that language and that knowledge, that in itself is going to help us to heal from colonization, because the people that are like 60 scoopers or adopted and all those that I have such a heart for, you know, I have friends that are still just so broken and trying to find their way back into their nation, and they're just craving it, and they're starved for all of that stuff. So stories told by Indigenous people, written, produced, and directed and acted, it just has a completely different gift to give people who are still starving, right? So it can get us on the same platform eventually, hopefully, because there's a shift just in the last like 3 years. So many of our friends, we can probably name 5 people on, you know, bang, 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 that have deals right now, which never happened in the history of filmmaking. Oh my goodness. So Michael, could you take on that question now?
Sure. I think piggybacking on what Kairyn said, the word that really jumped out to me is deconstruction of that language. Particularly when you're talking about healing, because I think the healing from how we have been perceived in American cinema it's going to require that deconstruction. It's going to require that losing that structure of, you know, us sitting in a theater and seeing ourselves used as devices, seeing ourselves used as caricatures that are, you know, badly drawn by people who never took the time to even see who we really are, who, you know, God, the villainy that we've been, you know, placed in, and that healing from that is going to have to, you know, work through all of that. So, you know, in using our own language, in using our you know, the traditional story structures, and you know, pulling apart the perception of how we've been perceived in American cinema, I think, just as you said, the number of us who are finally getting film deals, who are finally getting TV deals and series, to us it seems huge, but in the grander scope, the needle is just barely starting to move, but it's moving enough that we're feeling it's feeling possible finally, which is something that I don't think anybody, older than my generation could have ever perceived. When, even people who, who worked, in those films, in that industry, anybody who worked for John Huston, anybody who, had to take on that role, that device and be that device, no one would have ever imagined that we would today have these opportunities. But to us, we have to keep in mind the responsibility of it as well, of really, it almost feels like breaking out of an abusive relationship in a lot of ways, because we're removing all of those shackles, we're removing all of those boundaries, we're removing all those obstacles that are put between us. And I think that the number one, the word that comes to mind is unencumbered. The healing can happen if we're unencumbered. We have to be free. If everybody can talk all they want about equality in the film industry and colorblindness in the film industry, which has never existed, but they can talk as much as they want about it. But until we are able to produce, to tell our stories in our own way, unencumbered, without someone feeling the need to correct us, then like I said, that needle's only going to move only so far.
I agree. I agree with that. Absolutely. I think it's FX. What other NBC and Crystal? What's Rutherford Falls on again?
Peacock, NBC.
Yeah, Peacock is part of the NBC. So it's, the different people that are taking chances. I'm very grateful. Very grateful. So if anybody from that arena is listening, we're very grateful, because I've heard, Crystal's worked on all of the shows, and I've been on Rutherford on an episode, and I listened to the writers, and they say that they're sitting in rooms with other Indigenous writers, and they're allowed to write what they want. And nobody's sitting over going, oh, you're going to change this and change that. And we don't find that funny. They're able to put in what they want. And that is very liberating, like you're talking about, Michael. And I agree with you 100%. I think we have to have our own studios. We have to have our own production companies. Why isn't anyone getting a full development deal like any other, a Caucasian on the planet? They get one film under their belt that has some success, and they get a five deal picture, like a development deal at a studio. I would like to see that for Indigenous people, where it's like, I'm getting behind you, So Crystal, you want to take that on?
Yeah, I love what everyone said. I really feel that we are in a really good place as Native Indigenous people. The main thing that I see, the biggest shift, is that we have Native people telling our stories. It's not a bunch of white people that are having cultural consultants on set, which is a check mark in the box. We have a cultural consultant. It's like, come on. We have real Native writers, like you just said, in the rooms, that we don't have people hanging over our shoulders, like, nitpicking every single thing. I just had a beautiful conversation with Dallas and Roman, about this thing. And we really are moving towards a really, really good place. Like, yes, like Michael said, and, Kalani and Kai, it's chipping away at the block, but we are at a really, really amazing place right now as Native people. I picked up this book. It's funny because this conversation, Hollywood's Indian, the portrayal of Natives in cinema the last 80 years, and we're not like the bloodthirsty Natives scalping white people anymore. Like, we have two comedies on network television right now. That's huge. Like Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs, that are not just based bareback on the back of a horse in the back in the day. Like real comedy stuff, real entertainment that is like humor to not just us, but also white people and every other race. They find it funny. So I think that's a huge win. And I think we're evolving in cinema and television. So that's great. Kai. Yes, we are in sriracha costume. That's funny. So we're in a great place. I feel like being a part of the shift, because, you know, watching you, Mom, you know, in this industry since I was a child. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I can't see any of you guys, but okay, there we go. You know, watching you literally chip away at the pavement, sitting on panels for SAG and, you know, and everything. And when they weren't even looking at us, to fast forward to, you know, 30 years later, and we're finally being seen. And yes, it's not where it, you know, where we want it to be yet, but it's definitely an exciting time for us. So I think that's great. And I can't wait to see what else that we're, you know, what's in store for us. I mean, like you said, we need to have our own production companies. Yes, we need to have our own, you know, the machine needs to be us. But I think we're on a, it's a nice, you know, it's a nice progression.
Yes, and
If
it's
that's
only
the right
the
word.
last like 3 years since, you know, I think Res Dogs was the first one that kind of, what's going on here with Reservation Dogs with Sterling and Taika's project. It's like everybody was sitting on pins and needles. What's this going to be? And finally it was released and we got to see it and laugh and go, oh, finally. It was such a breath of fresh air. And then Rutherford Falls got that, you know, greenlit. Sienna got greenlit, and it was just like, oh, everybody's sitting there, you know. It's not like there's 1,000 other TV shows, but we have 2. So everybody was sitting there going, I can't wait till the release date. We get to watch this, you know, and you watch it 5 times over and over and over because, and you know, it's like smoke signals. We know every line by heart because it's all we have, right? So
Yeah.
to celebrate it, but you know, in Rutherford Falls, how they just like, they're so good with gender. You know, I'm so proud of them. Look,
Very inclusive.
there. I mean, it's just like they're really and they're just being organic about it, you know. And I'm so proud of the way that they're addressing all of that. And then, you know, how the youth are hilarious in Reservation Dogs. So I've gotten scripts that are going, you know, 5 years ago, everyone in Hollywood turned us down. They said, no, this would never sell. But now that Reservation Dogs, now would you read my script? It's like, you know.
They opened the door. Yeah.
Doors. Yes. Because before it was non-Indigenous people writing our content. So they were listening to that voice, which that's a valid voice too. So let's actually move into that question. We'll just skip a couple. And so is there relevance in who tells Indigenous story? And if so, why? Okay, so I'm going to start with Kai. You start it first. So what's the relevance on who tells Indigenous story? And if so, why?
There's so much relevance with who tells Indigenous stories. I could go on forever, but the biggest thing that comes to my mind is I have to speak about myself really in my experience, and that's the only way that I can really be authentic. But one of the biggest things that happens to me in the industry, because I write, but I also act. And so I get to see kind of both sides of the coin, I guess, when it comes to how the story is made. I get to portray what the story is, but then I also get to write and decide what that story is going to be based on. And one of the biggest issues that I always have is, which is really relevant to this question, is you don't really understand the Indigenous experience deeper than surface level unless you are an Indigenous person. There are certain nuances. And as spirit people, and as somebody who is Two-Spirit myself, who identifies as Two-Spirit, as a Winkte person, all I am is spirit. And so it really doesn't make sense to me that there's going to be somebody, we'll say like a Munya or a white person, for example, who's going to be telling this story about somebody like me, when A, they're not even a part of the community. They have never grown up with any of these experiences. They don't have the blood memory that I do. And I see Indigenous queer people written a lot. And I've auditioned for many roles for Indigenous queer people, and a majority of them were written by non-queer, non-Indigenous people. And as I'm going through the script, I'm reading it and I'm like, wow, I would never say that. Wow, I've never heard somebody talk like that. Wow, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why are they saying it like this? Why don't they use this word instead? And there's so many things that I'm picking up on. And I think I would pick up on those things regardless of whether I was a writer myself. There's just things that as an Indigenous person, you know, there's so many nuances. It's really difficult to fake living an Indigenous experience because there's so many things that go into it that you just wouldn't know unless you were Indigenous. And that's a lot of people think that like you can just Google how to be Native. It doesn't work like that. Like you can tell when somebody is or when somebody isn't, and that's why pretendians get called out quite a bit, quite easily. You can suss them out pretty quickly. But I'll say that the relevance for letting an Indigenous person tell that story is because at the end of the day, the intent and the spirit that you're going to be putting in to whatever work it's going to be, especially writing or acting, it's gonna read inauthentic, and it's going to be devoid of that spirit. And if as Indigenous people we're saying that everything that we're doing revolves around that spirit and that intent and who we are and all of that importance that we just talked about when it comes to stories, when it comes to things like lineage and languages. Do you know how much difficulty I have reclaiming my mother tongue? We speak Iskabi or Stony, and that's a language that I've never ever heard spoken, especially the dialect we speak in any type of mainstream media. And I know that when I accept my first Oscar one day, I'll go up there and I'll speak entirely in Stony, because it's going to be something that only I can do as somebody from my nation. And a non-Indigenous white person who's going to be writing these stories just won't have that connection to it. It's not going to mean as much. It's not going to do the same thing. And moving forward, any of these kind of roles or these stories that are going to be constantly created for money, especially now that there's this big wave of, I don't even know what you want to call it, this brown wave of like people putting so much money and energy and hype into Indigenous storytellings with shows like Rutherford Falls and also with Trickster and with Reservation Dogs and all this kind of stuff. It's like you're seeing everyone kind of jump on the bandwagon and being like, wow, Indigenous people are really talented. And they act like they don't already know that, but we know that in our communities. We've known that forever. And so now there's finally opportunities, there's funding, there's eyes, there's ears listening and watching, and people yearning. There's this demand for it now. And so the relevance is the most important right now than any other time, because there's going to be a certain amount of food that needs to be eaten, and we need to fill the stomachs of Indigenous people first and foremost with all of that bounty that's being created. I truly think that that's going to be the way that we move forward. And I really hope that those spaces are protected by other Indigenous people in the industry, but I especially hope that it's protected by non-Indigenous people who historically and presently currently have all the power when it comes to Hollywood and when it comes to film and media. They're going to be the ones that their allyship or lack thereof is really going to be telling on themselves. I guess it's really going to be put at the forefront. You're gonna notice it a lot, and I really hope that a lot of those people who kind of talk the talk are finally able to start backing that up with ensuring that these stories and these narratives are being rightfully claimed and taken back and told by Indigenous people.
Mm-hmm. Great, awesome. I love what you said there. I have to add, so I'm going to ask you, Kai, what about Dances with Wolves, that painted us in a positive portrayal, but was written by a Caucasian man? So yes, 120 years of cinema, the narrative has been false about us. First of all, it painted us as a generalized, we are all the same. da 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 with the feather and the teepees and the buckskin. And everybody, we all know we're as different as Germans are to Ukrainians. Okay, so that are you? Are you? You don't walk into a room and say, but let the Germans speak, and then the Ukrainian, and then would the Irish lady like to talk? They don't do that. They generalize themselves too because they're removed from their land. So they've generalized us as well. So it's like all those brown folks on the North American continent are all the same. So that's why you heard your Stony dialect ever spoken. It's like Lakotas and some Navajos.
If I may interject just for 1 second, Mom, just for people who are not listening, there's over 550 different Indigenous languages and tribes out there. So that's what we're talking about, is that we're not just categorized as one people.
In
there's
Canada alone.
Yeah.
But in the United States, so there's over 1,000 tribes just in the continent alone. Well over, but 500 plus on each side. Yes. And we all have, each tribe has different dialects too. The Cree tribe has different dialects. The people in Manitoulin Island speak with the French influence completely different than the people, in Enoch or Hobbema, right? We're 5 provinces apart, So
right.
Absolutely. So what do you think about that, Kai? Like, the Dances with Wolves or Dreamkeeper, or, that tried to treat the people with respect, and completely change the narrative so that we were in a positive light. What do you think? How does that factor in with you?
For me, it's tough, but the way that I see it, it's like, sure, okay, they did their best, but for me, it's always about like intent does not equal impact. And when we're telling stories about Indigenous people, regardless of whether they're trying to do their best, what they're doing is exactly what you're saying. It's perpetuating this narrative that Indigenous people are a monolith, and it feeds into this idea of pan-indigeneity. And when you do that, you essentially erase so much culture, so much history, so many communities, so much tribal pride. Like even just you saying like, oh, your dialect of Stony, like I also speak Cree. I grew up speaking Plains Y Cree. My Cree is actually way better than my Stony is. And I just booked a gig speaking Woodland Stony, Woodland Cree, and I had to teach myself how to speak Woodland Cree in this audiobook that I was doing. And it made me feel bad because I'm thinking, wow, okay, sure, I speak Cree, but this white director is like, it's not that big of a difference. Just change the way that you say, this and this and this. And that's why I'm saying, it's like, sure, it seems fine. There's no harm in it. Yes, I can speak the language, but it's like, I understand what's going on behind the scenes a little bit more. And I understand this bigger picture of, we are painting all of us with the same brush. And eventually what it's going to come down to is, in Hollywood, we're only going to continue to keep doing that. And Indigenous people are all, regardless of whether we're, riding in buckskin loincloths on the backs of horses and scalping people, we're going to be doing that, except it's going to be in a modern sense. We're going to be in like universities and in law courtrooms and all that kind of stuff. But we're only going to be talking about indigeneity as this kind of like romanticized fantasy of what it means to be Indigenous, where everyone wears a war bonnet and everyone speaks some dialect of this language that we've always heard in Dances with Wolves and Last of the Mohicans and all of these other different movies that have always been using the same stereotypes. That's what they are. They're just stereotypes. And so I think regardless of whether there is a good or bad intention behind it, best practice is always to allow Indigenous uniqueness and beauty shine when it gets the chance, because it almost never does. And that just goes back to the other 2 questions that we've been answering about just like putting Indigenous people in the driver's seat and allowing them to really take the reins on those kind of creative processes when it comes to telling our narrative and the way that happens. But yeah, I really I really do hope that in the future I'll be able to be one of those people handing in a script and being like, this is the language that I want to see represented, and I'm not going to rest until it's represented in a really honorable way. Because when you do lazy storytelling and you cut corners, it shows. And you're also you're sending a message to the people that are watching or experiencing this art, and you're also sending a message to all of those people who auditioned, who applied to work on the project, who were denied, the people who have to see it go to other people who are maybe not even Indigenous, who are just Asian, who look Indigenous. And this happens all the time. So I feel like that's another question, but to answer your question, that's how I feel about it.
Okay. So Kai's covered a lot. So from that, take a dive off of what he said and cover that question in your words. Kalani, you want to take that?
Sure. Oh, I'm glad you called on me. Kai, man, I love so much that you're talking about. Earlier when you said storytelling was taught to you or likened to currency, I love that so much, because you know what? Storytelling, it costs you. It costs us to write it. It costs us to portray it. It's got to cost something, and I love, like, when I talk to other artists, because yeah, we can talk about, like, maybe the end result is we move through things and we can heal things, but it costs us, man. Like, and it hurts sometimes. And sometimes it hurts so good and you feel like you've accomplished something, but man, at the end, you're spent. You know what I mean? And the scary part is when people become bankrupt because they put so much into wanting to change the industry, and it can break them, right? And it can bankrupt them and rob them of all of their riches. And what I will say, I want to talk about, which is completely related, is another thing that you said earlier, Kai, is that this style of storytelling or these inaccuracies were put upon us, right? Like, they were imposed upon us, and somehow we have to take that as our identity. Do you know what I mean? And the way I look at it is this, and I may be completely wrong, but the way I look at the industry is Hollywood historically has been run by business people, right? Business people who base this model on what sells and what they think the audience wants, right? Coming up early in my career, people would tell me all the time, people that I know, they'd be like, Kalani, how come you're not doing comedies? Like, you're funny, like, you're so much fun, like, and you got this great sense of humor. Why are you always just doing dramas? And I'm like, because that's not the way the industry wants to see me. They want to see me crying and dying. If you're brown, you're probably going to go down, as Delana Studi once said. And we laugh about it, but it's true. Like, let's really let's look back at it, right? And it's true. You're brown, you're going down. And it's just the way that we've been depicted, right? And those are the things that I'm auditioning for. These are the things that happen. So the way I look at it is, you have these gatekeepers, right? These business people who say, hey, this is what sells. Now, we can see this to this day. Why are we doing remakes of these same old films and television shows and over and over and over? Like, sometimes we're in the third, rendition of this TV show or movie, and you're like, really? Do we really not have any other stories? Or do we have to go to BBC and then create The Office in America that they did in the UK? I mean, come on, let's get original here. But I think that for me, and I'm sorry I'm getting really excited about this, but the thing for me is that I think that that's the lazy way, right? That's somebody saying, no, this is who our audience is, and this is what the audience wants. They're just gatekeepers because the audience has been telling us all along, this is what we want to see. We want to see this, A, B, C, D. We want to see the complexities, the nuances of all of the tapestry of people who live on this continent, not about the people who think that this is what the commercials want to put money behind, is something that they've seen over and over and over. So I look at Dances with Wolves and Dreamkeeper, where they were doing these doing a shift, right? And it was a step that was happening back then. And like you said, great intention, right? And so it was a step though for us, you know, and all of a sudden it kind of opened up. But most importantly, I think, is that it created this idea for the gatekeepers to say, hey, we can actually make money on this. Like people are interested in something like this. So I think that that's where the shift is changing. And I think that what's been happening, and this is in my opinion, right? I think I understand a part of this is that especially as a writer and walking into situations where they're saying, no, this is how you tell a story. You know, like this is how, like, you know, I have a musical that I'm developing, and it's like, oh no, in musical theater, and right there you shot yourself in the foot, Mr. Producer Man, because you're saying that this is the way that it's always been done. But you got to question, how has it been done? You know, for the history of cinema, right? So I get excited about this because I'm just like, it's so much to unpack. But I think that we're in a really great time because now that gatekeepers can see that there's an appetite for shows like Rutherford Falls and all of these great opportunities that are happening now, it makes them a little bit more risky, right? For them, right? Because it's, well, that's a risk, you know, well, we know what worked for this, but what are the demographics? Give us the analytics. So I think that we're on path, right? Like we're finding our way through it. And what's great, I think that the most important thing I think is for the young ones that are looking on screen and saying, oh yeah, I could do that. That's a possibility for me. When I was a kid, I didn't think that it was. I just thought, wow, what a great dream that would be, right? I'll try. But to know that, yeah, I could be writing in a show. I could be in a writer's room. I could be producing something. I could be making a deal. And these are all the things that I feel like can help us to find our hope within the things, because all those victories, you know, like I cannot even imagine like the fights that you had to have, you know, with Older Than America, like convincing people, right? That's the hard part. It's like, you know, most people just got to go in and pitch their idea. But when you're trying to pitch against a machine that say, well, we've never had this before, so I don't know. But now we can reference these things. So I don't want to take up too much more time because I know we're getting close, but I want to pass this off to whomever.
Thank you, Kalani. You know, I like what you said about that. I mean, people didn't even know about residential school when I made that movie. I made that movie to address the racism in Edmonton that I used to see when I would come home, and it would make me sick. And I go, if people just knew why these people are like that, because again, Edmonton is the second largest Indigenous population in the country, and the racism is disgusting. So I wanted to address that. It's like, let me put the two and two together for you. But, you know, it wasn't received on the platform it should have. It was given a really racist distribution deal. And I had to go out and hustle for a year to film festivals and collect reviews and awards and blah, 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 and come back with a pile of stuff and go, here, look, there is an audience for it. And it's not just for little dinky regional things in Indian country. I didn't make this for Indians. We know our trauma. I made this for the non-Indigenous people, right? So then they changed the deal completely and sold it on a national level. But I had to work my ass off for a year to get that deal. I mean, that's ridiculous, you know? So now with the new, you know, Indigenous storytellers, yeah, I never thought I would see it in my lifetime. I'm 59. I'm older. I'm the oldest one here. And, you know, I thought I would never see it in my lifetime. So to see these young people, and I tell them when I see them, I am so grateful that you're getting the opportunity that I never even imagined would happen. And I get to watch this. I get to witness the young talent up and coming, and pray to Creator that we get these studio deals. You know, I'm trying to get slate financing so I can help other Indigenous people that were in my shoes and never had that. So you don't have to go knocking on the doors for 5 years. You know what I mean? And that's what we need to do. Crystal and Michael, I still want to hear from you on this topic. So who wants to go first?
Okay, I'll go. I will say this might be a little controversial, but like our white allies, okay, like people like Taylor Sheridan, okay, who got Wind River. The Wind River was a film made about an MMIW woman who was, murdered in the oil camps. Would that movie have been put out if it wasn't for Taylor Sheridan? You know what I'm saying? Like he is a white man with blue eyes, and he went and stayed lived on the res for 3 years and researched and lived with the people and wanted to learn and was like willing to do everything it took to learn about this story, because he had, the belief from the machine behind him to push him forward. So it's like, so he got that story out there. If it was a talented, Native writer who had this story and went to Paramount or Lionsgate or Sony and said, this story is important, this needs to be out there, would it have been made? I don't think so.
No way. No.
So I really feel like there is something to be said for our allies who have this power to get these stories out there. I mean, he's also the creator of Yellowstone, who's employed so many Native people and gives these power roles to them as well. It's not the victim. It's not, the poor little me, Indian in the corner. It's like, so I feel like there's kind of a balance that I do recognize, and I do, I appreciate our allies who have this power to get our stories out there as well in the right way, and who really want to learn. And like I said, he went and lived on the res for 3 years and was like, teach me, I want to know, I have a connection to you people. And so I just want to say I do appreciate that. However, it doesn't, cancel out anything else that anybody else has said, but I just wanted to acknowledge our allies as well.
I agree 1,000%. Dreamkeeper is what made me have the confidence to start a production company in the first place. Older Than America would not exist had it not been for my experience on that, of watching people. First of all, John Fusco went to the Grandpa Fool's Crow and said, I love your culture and I want to tell these stories. And Grandpa said, only if you learn Lakota. So he did. He learned Lakota. He said, and the only way I'll tell you is in Lakota language. So he did. So he received these stories in the Lakota language and then wrote the story of Dreamkeeper. And then Matthew O'Connor, who I love and adore, and the production team, they were all, when they partnered up with John, they made it law to respect every Indigenous nation that was represented. They had elders there. I've never seen respect like that, because I've dealt with such racism in this industry. It's disgusting. And it was the first time I saw people being respectful and following protocols and being honest, in genuinely respectful. And I went, wow, maybe we can pull this off. And it gave me the confidence to jump in and take that leap of faith and go in and dive in. It was hard as a motherfucker, and I'll be honest about that. But from that, it took like 5 years to get Older Than America made. But it was Dreamkeeper that gave me the launch pad, and I'm forever grateful. And I love all the stories that John tells. Not every storyteller does that, and they don't follow the pathways and protocols. But when they do, I think it's awesome, because yes, they do have the power to walk in to a major studio and get the $100 million, which my movie was 1.2. You know what I mean? A little bit different, right? We have a platform that big, so we can't possibly tell the stories we want to tell. I have a hot chick action flick. And there's no way I'm going to get the budget for that until I get 16 films under my belt. You know what I mean? It's just the way it is with privilege as opposed to being Indigenous. So Michael, can you cover that, please?
Yeah, I mean, with the minute we have left, I will just say that as far as, it all comes down to perspective, and our people's history, our people's story in the history of American cinema has been just that. It's been a story. And now the doors are open, things are happening, we have these opportunities, and now we have the platform to rewrite American history.
Yes.
And it's
Really.
not only, of course, it's beyond our responsibility. That's a given. It's our privilege to do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I believe in the spirit of the storyteller. You know, stories come organic when we're in tune, and they we release them. But yes, just like Kalani said, you get bankrupt when you truly express and you allow a creator or ancestors to come through you. You get that wake up at 3 a.m. thing, and you're like, oh my God, and you're all these ideas, and you're just tired. And then you go to bed and you go, oh, hang on, there's more. And you have to get up, and you're just like, remember, you know how when you're a slave to that storyteller spirit, oh gosh. And then, you're burnt out for 3 days, or you sit and you do a writing thing for 15 days in a row. And then all of a sudden, yes, bankruptcy happens when you're truly working through spirit, as opposed to being a businessman, like the cookie cutter who does Titanic for the 4th time, right? Yeah. So exactly. So it's a good time. I think that we're evolving, we're opening doors. I never knew of a director, producer, or writer. When I was a kid, there was 2 channels, right? Again, I'm 59. So there was no such thing. There was not even an Indigenous actor. Iron Eyes Cody was Italian, right? And most of the actors were white with wigs and stuff like that. There was no such thing, but something drove me to that. Yes. As Charlie Hill talks about. I wish we had more time, but I think we're at the end of our rope here for this panel. And I think Tyree and Gary talked about if this is received well, we can continue this dialogue, because there's so much to share. Pathways and Protocols, which is a document that every production company was distributed throughout Canada. Everybody has to follow it in order to get funding here. But again, this is government, that's studio, right? So we have to start, you guys could start infiltrating that into the US side. You guys live right in the backyard of the studios. Yeah. So thank you everybody for your contributions. I think this was a wonderful panel. It was a great introduction to the subject. And I do hope that we can continue this conversation. It's a very important time. We're feeling a shift, an explosion of inclusivity. And yeah, we get to sing and dance with everybody else now. It's a party. Yeah. I love you guys. Thank you so much. And thank you, Tyree and Gary and Seth. I appreciate you guys for hosting this for us, Indigenous folks. Good night. Do we have a close,
Wow.
Tyree?
That was incredible, right? I'm shaking. Are you shaking? I'm mind blown by what came out of this conversation today. And I really hope that you listened with open ears. Truly. I have so many people to thank for this conversation. I want to thank Crystle Lightning. I want to thank Georgina Lightning. I want to thank Kalani Queypo, Michael Uribes. I want to thank Kairyn Potts. I want to thank Judith Bourne for PR. I want to thank Michael TEOLI for the intro music. I want to thank Seth Dorcey for being the streaming director this evening, so you can see me in your living room, your bedroom, wherever. Hi. And I want to thank the entire Skylight Theater Company staff for making this possible. If you want to tune into more conversations, visit our website, which should be linked down below. And we have a couple coming up in August, so you better check it out. And you know what else is in August? Our show, Lavender Men. It opens August 6th, so you need to go get your tickets at skylighttix.org. I'm gonna be there and I wanna meet you, okay? So a lot's been happening in our theater, and I thought it would be a good idea to give you a little sneak preview about what's been going on. So, Seth, would you do me the honors?
This endeavor, all of these beautiful people that we have been able to meet along the way, are a lesson in perseverance, patience, and grace. Some of you have been on this ride with us from that time. Some of you have come today, and I just want to say thank you all so much for agreeing to be here on this journey.